What happens when a friendship that was never meant to be turns into something far darker than anyone could have imagined? This is the chilling story of Lauren Hugelmaier and Matt Phelps, a tale that will make you question everything you know about trust, fate, and the dangers hidden in the most unexpected places. Lauren first crossed paths with Matt when they were in middle school. At the time, they were nothing more than distant acquaintances, casual interactions, nothing more. But years later, something completely unexpected happened. It was a simple message on Instagram, a request that would change everything. Matt, now 26, reached out to Lauren after years of silence. It was sudden, curious, and, in a strange way, out of the blue. Why now? What had brought him back into her life after all this time? Lauren, intrigued but cautious, accepted his request. She began following him back, unaware that this seemingly innocent interaction would set off a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted. Matt couldn't resist. As he scrolled through Lauren's Instagram, something about her caught his attention. He liked every post, every photo, every story she shared. Was it nostalgia? Or something more? There was an undeniable pull, a strange connection he couldn't shake off. He couldn't explain it, but he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. Before long, their messages turned into daily conversations, texts, calls, and late-night chats that stretched on for hours. They bonded over shared passions, Harry Potter, Star Wars, and a world of geeky interests that felt like a perfect match. Laughter and late-night talks became the foundation of their renewed friendship, which quickly grew into something far more intimate. But there was something deeper, something that made Matt stand out even more to Lauren, his devotion to faith. Raised in a Christian household, Lauren found herself increasingly drawn to Matt's unwavering dedication to his beliefs. In him, she saw a kindred spirit, someone who shared her values and beliefs. It felt too good to be true. But sometimes, what feels perfect on the surface hides a darker reality beneath. As their bond deepened, so did the unsettling question, how well can you truly know someone from behind a screen? What dangers might lie ahead when two people reconnect after years apart, and what happens when trust is given too easily? On the outside, Lauren and Matt seemed like the picture-perfect couple, two souls bound together by faith, love, and shared values. To the world, their connection appeared deep, unshakable, and pure. Their relationship radiated happiness and joy, leaving friends and family to believe they had found their soulmates, the ones they were always meant to be with. It was clear to everyone that this was only the beginning, that an engagement was inevitable, and before long, Matt would take the next step and propose to Lauren, sealing their future together. But while Lauren and Matt's love story seemed like a fairy tale, there was a shadow lurking behind the scenes. Lauren's father, Dale, had always been fiercely protective of his daughter. From the moment she was born, his priority had been her safety and happiness, and that extended to every relationship she ever had. Dale had watched over Lauren with an unwavering vigilance, determined to ensure she was never hurt by anyone. The thought of her marrying someone he barely knew filled him with an unease that gnawed at him. He questioned Matt's character, wondering if this seemingly perfect match was truly the right choice for his daughter. Then came the engagement, a moment that should have been a celebration of their love, a joyful occasion marking the beginning of their journey as a couple. Lauren was over the moon, glowing in her stunning white dress as her loved ones gathered to toast their exciting future. But the evening, meant to be filled with joy, soon took a strange and uncomfortable turn. Matt's mother arrived at the party dressed in white, a shocking gesture that no one could ignore. It was a subtle yet blatant act of disrespect, leaving everyone present in stunned silence. It was clear that Matt's mother was far from thrilled about her son's decision to marry Lauren. Her presence and her attire spoke volumes, her disapproval was almost palpable. The tension in the room became thick, and for Lauren, it was impossible to ignore the sting of rejection. Unable to shake off her discomfort, Lauren decided to confront Matt after the engagement party. She needed answers, an explanation for his mother's disrespectful behavior. But when she approached him, expecting some semblance of support, Matt's response was far from comforting. He dismissed her concerns as if they were trivial, brushing off the situation with a calmness that only added to Lauren's unease. Matt explained that he had grown up with his grandparents, not his parents, and that his relationship with his mother had never been ideal. "What she thinks doesn't matter to me," he told her. But those words, so casual, so indifferent, cut through Lauren in a way she hadn't expected. It was as if Matt's response lacked the weight of someone who truly cared about her feelings, and the situation only deepened the cracks in their seemingly perfect world. Despite the unsettling beginning to their engagement, Lauren and Matt pressed forward, their hearts set on building a future together. In 2016, they made the bold decision to relocate to Raleigh, North Carolina, in search of new opportunities and a fresh start. But even as they settled into their new life, the foundation they had built remained rooted in their shared Christian faith. They lived each day with the values that had brought them together, their devotion to God and to each other guiding their decisions. Matt found work at an in-home care company, where his hard work and dedication quickly earned him the title of Employee of the Month. It was a small victory, but one that Lauren couldn't help but feel proud of. She admired his commitment and the quiet strength he displayed in his work. However, Matt's success was only part of the equation. Lauren's contributions to their life together were just as significant, though they were often unnoticed. To support their growing life in Raleigh, she took on an exhausting schedule, juggling multiple jobs at once. By day, she worked full-time at a prestigious Fortune 500 company. By night, she became a jack of all trades, taking on side jobs to help make ends meet. Babysitting, working in the church nursery, even starting her own side business selling candles, Lauren's entrepreneurial spirit was unstoppable. She was determined to create financial stability for herself and Matt, believing that one day, her hard work would pay off. The idea of owning her own business was a dream that lingered in the back of her mind. The thought of being her own boss, of building something meaningful, was a vision that fueled her late nights and long hours. It wasn't just about money, it was about freedom, the freedom to shape her own future and create something lasting. Every Tuesday night, Lauren and Matt would make the trip to their favorite local church. It was a time for reflection, for community, and for them to reconnect with the deeper aspects of their relationship. But as time passed, the cracks in their seemingly perfect world began to widen. The question lingered, could love truly survive the weight of all these hidden tensions? What was really at stake in their pursuit of happiness? To grow increasingly frustrated and resentful, she tried to be understanding, believing that he might just be going through a rough patch, but the constant instability in their financial situation, combined with his lack of motivation, only deepened her stress. Lauren had always been a hard worker, ambitious and dedicated, while Matt's behavior seemed to contradict everything she stood for. She was juggling multiple jobs, often working long hours to make ends meet, while he seemed content to flit from one short-term job to the next, never fully committing to anything. At first, Lauren thought that maybe it was a temporary phase, but as the months passed, it became clear that Matt's behavior was not just a temporary setback, it was a pattern. As the financial strain mounted, Lauren found herself spending more and more time away from home, pouring herself into her work and side hustles. She felt increasingly isolated, caught between her love for Matt and her growing resentment of his irresponsibility. The man she had once seen as her soulmate, her partner in everything, was now a stranger to her, a man she no longer recognized. To make matters worse, Matt's growing discontentment seemed to spill over into their personal lives. He began to withdraw emotionally, retreating into himself. Lauren would come home after long days of work, hoping for a warm conversation or a sense of partnership, but instead, she found Matt either glued to the TV, brooding silently, or distracted by his own thoughts, seemingly indifferent to her struggles. The distance between them grew with each passing day. Lauren's frustration began to build into an overwhelming sense of disappointment. She had always been the one to support him, through thick and thin, but it felt like the more she gave, the less she received in return. She couldn't help but wonder if the man she had married was ever truly the person she had fallen in love with. The final straw came when Matt made a decision that felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked toward together. After yet another brief stint at a job, he came home one evening with the announcement that he was quitting once again. This time, he didn't even seem bothered by the weight of his decision. Lauren, on the verge of exhaustion, snapped. The words she had been holding back for so long finally erupted. If you found this story gripping and unsettling, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Stay tuned for more true crime stories that delve deep into the darkest corners of the human mind. Your support helps us bring more of these thought-provoking stories to life. "Matt, I can't keep doing this," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You keep quitting jobs, you're not helping us financially, and I'm the one holding everything together. I need you to be here with me, to fight with me, to build something together. I can't do this alone anymore." Matt's response was cold, distant. He shrugged, as if he had no real care for the words she had just spoken. His inability to acknowledge the strain he was putting on their marriage was a hard pill for Lauren to swallow. Her anger turned to sadness, and she realized that she was no longer fighting for their marriage, she was fighting for something that Matt no longer seemed willing to fight for. That night, as Lauren lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of their situation pressed down on her with unrelenting force. She realized that the love she had once felt for Matt was fading, slowly, but undeniably. The man she had married was not the same man she had once known. His emotional distance, his apathy, and his constant self-destructive tendencies had eroded the foundation of their relationship. Lauren had always believed in the sanctity of marriage and the vows they had taken, but now she found herself questioning everything. Had she made the right choice? Was this the life she had dreamed of? The life she had envisioned, filled with love, support, and mutual respect, now seemed like a distant memory, something that had slipped through her fingers without her even realizing it. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Lauren found herself at a crossroads. She loved Matt deeply, but she also knew that she couldn't continue sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of a relationship that had become more of a burden than a partnership. The person she had once been, joyful, optimistic, and full of hope, was slipping away, replaced by someone who felt drained, disillusioned, and uncertain of the future. The loneliness she felt in her marriage was suffocating. Despite being surrounded by people who cared about her, Lauren felt more isolated than ever. It was as though the emotional connection that had once bonded her to Matt had dissipated into thin air, leaving her to navigate the complexities of her life alone. She began to wonder if this was how it was always going to be, if she would forever be the one holding everything together, while Matt continued to drift away, lost in his own struggles. The love she had once felt for him seemed to be fading, replaced by a growing sense of exhaustion and resentment. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, scrolling through old photos of their wedding day, happy memories that now felt like distant dreams, Lauren realized that she had to make a choice. She could continue down this painful path, hoping that things would somehow get better, or she could take control of her own destiny and move forward. The decision wasn't easy. It never is. But deep down, Lauren knew that if she wanted to find happiness again, she had to let go of the man who no longer recognized the value of their love. The hardest part was accepting that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, love alone is not enough to keep a relationship alive. Was slowly unraveling in front of her eyes. The emotional distance between them had only deepened, and Lauren's attempts to engage Matt in meaningful conversation were met with cold indifference or, worse, silence. She could feel the weight of her isolation growing heavier each day, like a physical presence pressing down on her chest. Every time she reached out, tried to pull him back from his virtual world, she was met with a response that was more dismissive than the last. The once jovial and loving man she had married was no longer the person she recognized. Matt had retreated into a shell of himself, and it was as though no matter how hard she tried, Lauren couldn't find a way to break through to him. As much as she wanted to fight for their relationship, she found herself questioning how much longer she could keep fighting alone. It wasn't just the strain on their finances that was taking its toll, it was the emotional toll of constantly feeling unseen and unheard. It hurt in ways that words couldn't fully capture. She had invested so much of herself into their marriage, her time, her energy, her love, and it felt as though it was all being drained away, with nothing in return. One evening, as Lauren sat quietly in their living room, her eyes scanning the empty space around her, she felt a sense of profound loss. She had once envisioned their home as a place of warmth, love, and shared moments, but now it felt cold and hollow. The walls, once filled with laughter and shared memories, seemed to echo her loneliness. She couldn't help but remember the person Matt had been when they first met. He was charming, ambitious, and filled with dreams. He had a drive that matched her own, and together, they had created a life they both believed in. But now, Matt's lack of ambition, his withdrawal from everything they had once enjoyed, seemed to overshadow all the good times they had shared. It felt like he had given up, not just on their marriage, but on life itself. Lauren had heard from friends and family that sometimes people go through phases, but what if this phase was permanent? What if this wasn't just a temporary setback, but the beginning of something more irreparable? She knew that if she didn't take control of the situation soon, she might lose herself entirely in the process. In an effort to understand Matt's state of mind, Lauren made a decision: she would confront him, finally putting her fears and frustrations into words. She wasn't sure if this would make any difference, but she couldn't bear the thought of leaving things unspoken any longer. She needed answers, and more than that, she needed to know if there was any hope left for their relationship. The conversation that followed was anything but easy. When Lauren asked Matt to sit down and talk, his response was less than enthusiastic. He looked at her with tired eyes, as though dreading what was about to come. But Lauren was resolute. She couldn't hold back anymore. "Matt, we need to talk," she began, her voice quivering with the emotion she had kept buried for so long. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I feel like I'm carrying this relationship all by myself, and it's breaking me. I need you to listen to me, to understand where I'm coming from." Matt remained silent for a long moment, his eyes locked on the floor. Lauren's heart raced as she waited for a response, but it seemed as though he was retreating even further into himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy with frustration. "I don't know what you want from me, Lauren," he muttered. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm just lost." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known things were bad, but hearing him admit to feeling so utterly lost shattered her. She had never imagined that Matt, the man she had married, could feel so hopeless. "I need you to fight for us, Matt," Lauren said, her voice breaking. "I need you to show up, to be here with me. I can't do this on my own anymore." For a moment, it seemed like Matt was going to open up, but then he shut down once again. "I don't know how to fix this, Lauren. I don't know what you want from me." Lauren, despite the tears welling in her eyes, took a deep breath. She had hoped for a breakthrough, for some kind of resolution, but the reality was that Matt didn't seem to have the answers she was desperately seeking. And that realization, more than anything, was what hurt the most. The conversation ended in silence. Lauren knew she had done her best to reach out to Matt, but it felt like he was too far gone, too consumed by his own struggles to see her pain. As she stood up to leave the room, she realized that she couldn't keep waiting for a change that might never come. She had given him every chance to step up, but now it was clear that she had to take the next step on her own, whether that meant fighting for their marriage or walking away. For the first time in a long time, Lauren felt a flicker of hope. Not hope that Matt would suddenly change, but hope that she could find her way forward, no matter what. She had been living in the shadow of someone else's pain for far too long, and now, she had to make the choice to reclaim her own life, her own happiness. The following days were filled with uncertainty, but also a growing sense of clarity. Lauren knew that if she was going to move forward, she had to start by taking care of herself. She began to lean more on her family and friends for support, seeking out the companionship and encouragement she had so longed for. Slowly but surely, she began to rediscover who she was outside of her marriage: strong, independent, and worthy of love. As for Matt, he continued to spiral, lost in his own emotional turmoil. Lauren had come to terms with the fact that there might be no saving their relationship, at least not in the way she had hoped. But one thing was certain, she could save herself. And that was enough for her to begin the painful, but necessary, journey of healing and rediscovery. The atmosphere grew tense as Lauren stood there, feeling humiliated and helpless. The air around her seemed thick with discomfort, and she could feel the eyes of everyone on her. Matt, who had been quiet up until that point, shifted uncomfortably, not knowing how to handle the situation. Lauren, despite the embarrassment, held her ground, trying to explain that she had only followed the instructions given to her. But her voice seemed to disappear into the escalating chaos. Matt's mother, clearly unwilling to take any responsibility, continued to berate Lauren. Her words were sharp, biting, and cold, accusing Lauren of trying to ruin the moment for the family. Lauren was taken aback. She had hoped this trip would be an opportunity to mend the strained relationship with her mother-in-law, but instead, it felt like a trap, a test she was destined to fail. The situation reached a breaking point when Matt's father, who had been silent up to that point, stepped in. His voice, though calm, carried a weight of authority that instantly silenced the room. "Linda, enough," he said, his words cutting through the tension. "This isn't helping anyone. Lauren, go ahead and change. We'll figure this out." Lauren, feeling both relieved and drained, nodded slowly. She had wanted to avoid any confrontation, but it seemed that her mother-in-law's disdain for her was too deep to be ignored. As she walked away to change into the new blue outfit she had bought, her heart sank. This trip, meant to be a fresh start for her and Matt, was quickly turning into yet another reminder of how fractured their lives had become. When she returned, she tried to maintain composure, but the damage had already been done. The photo shoot was officially cancelled, and the rest of the evening was filled with awkward silences and forced pleasantries. The situation had escalated so quickly, and Lauren couldn't help but feel like the outsider in a family that had never truly accepted her. Later that evening, as the group gathered around the dinner table, the mood remained tense. Lauren could barely eat, her appetite lost to the mix of frustration and sadness that simmered inside her. Matt, who had remained mostly quiet during the ordeal, looked uncomfortable, unsure of how to make things right. His silence only deepened the rift between them. Lauren felt the old familiar loneliness creeping in, the same feeling she had back home when Matt withdrew into his video games. As the evening wore on, Lauren and Matt found themselves alone in their hotel room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing, her body exhausted. Matt sat across from her, looking at her with weary eyes. "I don't know what to say," Matt muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to warn you about my mom, but I never thought it would go like this." Lauren looked at him, the frustration she had been holding back finally spilling over. "I didn't ask for this, Matt. I didn't ask to be treated like an outsider. I thought this trip would help, but it only made things worse. I can't keep doing this, feeling like I'm constantly the one who's wrong, the one who has to bend and twist to fit into your family's expectations." Matt didn't respond immediately. Instead, he rubbed his face, as though trying to wake himself from a nightmare. "I don't know how to fix it. I really don't," he confessed, his voice tinged with regret. "I want to make things better for us, but I can't seem to get it right." Lauren, hearing the defeat in his voice, felt a pang of sympathy. But she couldn't ignore the truth of their situation. She had tried, with everything she had, to hold on. She had made sacrifices for him, for their relationship. But it was clear now that Matt was still stuck in his own world, unable, or unwilling, to meet her halfway. "Matt, I need more than just words," Lauren said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. "I need you to show up for me. I need you to show up for us. I can't keep living in this limbo, waiting for things to magically change. I need someone who's present, who's here with me, not just physically, but emotionally." There was a long silence between them, as if both of them were waiting for the other to make the next move. Lauren's heart was heavy with the weight of what she was saying. She had reached a breaking point, but she wasn't sure if Matt could hear her anymore. She had tried everything to fix their marriage, but it felt like she was the only one fighting. "I don't know if I can give you what you need," Matt said quietly, his voice breaking. "I don't even know if I know who I am right now. I feel lost, Lauren. I don't know how to be the person you want me to be." Hearing this only confirmed what Lauren had feared. She wasn't asking him to be someone he wasn't, but she needed him to be present, to show her that their relationship meant something to him. And right now, it didn't feel like he was willing to fight for it. Lauren wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek, her hand shaking as she reached for her phone. She knew that at that moment, she had a choice to make. She could continue to fight for a relationship that seemed more and more like a battle, or she could walk away and take the first step toward healing herself. She sat there, her fingers hovering over the screen, unsure whether to call her mother or her sister for advice. The thought of opening up about everything made her stomach churn with anxiety, but she knew deep down that she couldn't keep holding all of this inside. She needed support, even if it meant facing the harsh reality of what her marriage had become. Finally, she let out a deep breath and hit call. The ringing echoed in the quiet room, and she waited, hoping for some sort of clarity, some guidance to help her navigate this overwhelming moment. When her sister picked up, Lauren's voice cracked as she began to speak, letting the emotions she had kept bottled up spill out. "I don't know what to do anymore," Lauren confessed. "I've tried everything, but it feels like we're just drifting further apart. I don't even know if I can save us." Her sister's voice was soft but steady. "Lauren, you've been carrying so much on your own. I think it's time to take a step back and figure out what you really want. You deserve to be happy, and sometimes that means making hard choices." The conversation gave Lauren a sense of relief, but also a painful clarity. She knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she couldn't keep sacrificing her own happiness for someone else's emotional baggage. As the days passed, Lauren's thoughts became clearer. She began to prioritize her own well-being, taking the necessary steps to reclaim her life, even if it meant stepping away from Matt. Though it felt like the end of a chapter, it was also the beginning of a new one, a chapter where Lauren could finally rediscover herself, free from the weight of a relationship that no longer served her. Decided to separate. Brooke, exhausted from the constant cycle of broken trust and financial strain, filed for divorce. For Matt, the end of his first marriage was a sobering wake-up call, but it was also the beginning of a pattern he would later repeat. As Lauren's suspicions about Matt deepened, she began to piece together the haunting parallels between his first marriage and their own relationship. The financial stress, the secrecy, and the growing emotional distance were all too familiar. But this time, Lauren was determined not to ignore the signs. She started keeping a journal of her own, documenting the small but significant things Matt was doing that raised red flags, his late-night trips, unexplained absences, and the increasing secrecy surrounding his phone and emails. Lauren couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was headed down the same painful path that Brooke had walked before her. She spent sleepless nights wondering how she had ended up here, how her once loving husband had become someone she no longer recognized. It was a conversation with her best friend, Emma, that finally pushed Lauren to take action. Emma had been a close confidant throughout Lauren and Matt's marriage, offering support during the ups and downs. Emma, having known Matt for years, was concerned about the growing distance she noticed between the couple. When Lauren admitted her fears, Emma gave her a piece of advice that would change everything. "You can't change Matt, Lauren. But you can change what you will tolerate." If you found this story gripping and unsettling, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Stay tuned for more true crime stories that delve deep into the darkest corners of the human mind. Your support helps us bring more of these thought-provoking stories to life. Lauren realized then that her relationship with Matt was no longer the healthy, loving partnership it had once been. She wasn't willing to continue down the same path that had led to the collapse of his first marriage. It wasn't just the money or the emotional distance, it was the trust that had been broken, the respect that had eroded, and the realization that she was holding on to a relationship that no longer served her. The next day, Lauren decided to confront Matt. It wasn't an easy decision, and she wasn't sure how it would unfold. But she knew she could no longer live in the shadow of uncertainty. With a deep breath and a heart full of resolve, she sat Matt down in their living room. "Matt," she began, her voice trembling but determined, "I need to ask you something. Are you hiding something from me? Are you being honest with me, especially about our finances and this woman who's been coming over?" She tried to keep her voice steady, but the anxiety she had been holding onto for so long began to spill over. Matt looked at her, his face hardening for a moment before he sighed. He could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the truth hanging between them. He had been avoiding this conversation for weeks, but he knew it had come to a breaking point. "I've been trying to figure things out," he said quietly, "but yes, there are things I've been hiding." His admission was like a slap to the face, and Lauren felt her heart race. But as he spoke, the truth began to unravel. Matt confessed that he had been dealing with his own struggles, emotional, financial, and personal. The weight of his past mistakes, particularly the infidelity in his first marriage, had never truly left him. He had been burying his pain in unhealthy ways, using money as a form of control and avoidance. The tension with his mother, his secretive behavior, and the distance he had put between himself and Lauren were all manifestations of his unresolved issues. Lauren listened, her heart breaking, but her mind made up. She had no more room for secrets or lies. She realized that as much as she loved Matt, she couldn't sacrifice her own well-being to save a marriage that had already been fractured beyond repair. "I can't do this anymore, Matt," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I've tried to help, tried to understand, but I can't keep losing myself in this. I need to take care of me. And right now, that means walking away." Matt sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew it was over. This wasn't just about the money or the secrets, it was about the years of emotional neglect that had built up between them. For the first time in a long time, he felt the full extent of what he had lost. The following weeks were a blur of emotions. Lauren moved out of their shared home, finding a small apartment in the city. The space was hers to reclaim, to heal, and to begin anew. She threw herself into her work, but she also sought therapy to unpack the emotional toll the relationship had taken on her. Meanwhile, Matt was left alone to confront his demons. He sought counseling as well, realizing that his past mistakes weren't going to just disappear. He had to face the painful reality of his actions, the way he had hurt both Brooke and Lauren. But this time, he was determined to do the hard work to understand himself and learn how to build healthier relationships moving forward. Months passed, and though the healing process was long and difficult, Lauren began to feel like herself again. She started making new memories, surrounded by friends and family who supported her decision to take control of her life. She was no longer defined by the toxic patterns of her marriage. One day, while on a trip with friends, Lauren stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a breathtaking view of the ocean. She took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill her lungs. It was in this quiet moment that she realized something profound: she had saved herself. Despite the heartache, the betrayal, and the uncertainty, she had found the strength to walk away and reclaim her life. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And in that moment, Lauren knew she had made the right choice. That he was going to spend some time with this woman to clear his head and work through some personal issues. This announcement struck Lauren like a blow to the stomach. She could barely comprehend what Matt was saying. After everything they had been through, after all the promises he had made to work on their relationship, he was leaving her for another woman. Lauren's heart sank as she watched Matt walk out the door with the woman. The very person who had been the source of her growing suspicion, and now, this. The betrayal seemed to cut deeper than any of the previous betrayals, as it came after they had worked together to confront his financial problems and rebuild their trust. In the days that followed, Lauren found herself in a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, deep sadness, and a crushing sense of abandonment. She tried reaching out to Matt, hoping to understand what had pushed him to make such a devastating choice. But Matt was distant, often evasive in his replies. It was as though the man she had once known had vanished, replaced by someone she couldn't recognize. In the midst of this turmoil, Lauren turned to her mother and sister for support. They did their best to comfort her, but there was little they could say to ease the pain of betrayal. They had seen it all unfold, and like Lauren, they were left questioning the man Matt had become. Yet, no matter how much she tried to seek solace, Lauren couldn't help but feel like a failure. She had given everything to make her marriage work, and now it felt like it was all slipping away. Matt's actions over the next few weeks made it clear that he wasn't planning to return. He spent time with the woman, and while Lauren tried to hold on to hope, the reality was settling in. The man she had once loved was lost to her, possibly forever. As the days turned into weeks, Lauren found herself navigating the painful decision of whether to let go completely or hold on to a version of the marriage that no longer existed. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Matt reached out to her. The message was simple, almost curt: "I need to talk." At this point, Lauren had no idea what to expect. Her heart raced as she arranged to meet him, unsure of what was about to unfold. She was ready for anything: anger, more betrayal, or perhaps some semblance of closure. What she wasn't prepared for was the confession that Matt would make. When they met, Matt's demeanor was somber, a far cry from the confident, evasive man who had left her so abruptly. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that Lauren hadn't seen in years. He admitted to the affair and expressed regret, but what struck Lauren the most was the guilt he seemed to carry. Matt told her that he had been struggling with deep feelings of inadequacy, feelings that he had never shared with her. He explained that his inability to communicate his inner turmoil had led him to make reckless decisions, and that the relationship with the other woman was an escape from the emotional chaos he had felt for months. Lauren listened in stunned silence. For a moment, she was torn between anger and compassion. She had never thought that Matt would open up like this, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pain his actions had caused. The trust they had built together had been shattered, and no amount of apologies could erase the betrayal. Yet, in the quiet after his confession, something shifted in Lauren. She realized that while Matt's actions had hurt her deeply, his struggles were his own to own, and she could not carry them for him any longer. The question wasn't whether she could forgive him, it was whether she could forgive herself for allowing herself to be treated this way. Over the next few weeks, Lauren took the time to reflect on her own journey. She sought therapy to help her process the emotional wreckage of the relationship. In therapy, she was encouraged to focus on her own healing and rediscover her sense of self. It became clear to her that she had spent so long trying to fix Matt's problems that she had neglected her own well-being. It was time to prioritize her happiness and take control of her future. Matt, on the other hand, seemed to have a long road ahead of him. He was still in a relationship with the woman he had been seeing, and while he expressed a desire to reconcile, Lauren knew that their marriage, as it had once been, was over. Trust, once lost, was incredibly difficult to rebuild, and Lauren understood that she could not wait around for Matt to change. In the months that followed, Lauren focused on herself. She took time to rediscover her passions, reconnect with friends, and pursue her career with a renewed sense of purpose. She started traveling, something she had always dreamed of doing but had put on hold in the chaos of her marriage. Slowly but surely, she built a life that was entirely her own, one that was not defined by the mistakes of her past or by the person who had once been her partner. Matt, too, seemed to be undergoing his own journey of self-discovery, though it was unclear whether he would ever truly change. His communication with Lauren became sparse, but they agreed to part ways amicably. Lauren, now stronger and more self-assured, was finally ready to let go of the man she had once thought she could build a future with. As Lauren moved forward, she became a symbol of resilience, showing that even in the face of the most painful betrayals, there was always the possibility for growth and renewal. Her journey wasn't about forgiveness for Matt, it was about reclaiming her own life, her own happiness, and her own future. Through it all, Lauren learned that sometimes, the hardest thing in life isn't the betrayal of others, it's the courage to forgive yourself and move forward. And preventing him from causing harm to himself in his agitated state. His hands were covered in blood, and his face was a mask of terror, confusion, and remorse. Officers were immediately struck by the overwhelming sense of dread in the air. Matt's disoriented behavior, combined with his frantic words on the 911 call, painted a chilling picture of what had transpired inside the home. The police quickly made their way inside to assess the situation. Lauren's lifeless body was found lying on the floor of their bedroom, a large pool of blood surrounding her. The bloody knife, as Matt had described, was lying on the bed beside her. The scene was hauntingly still, with the stark contrast of the blood and the silence amplifying the horror of what had occurred. As the police secured the area, forensic experts were called in to investigate further. Matt was placed in the back of a squad car, still mumbling incoherently about his actions, but his words were jumbled and hard to make sense of. Officers had trouble distinguishing whether Matt was genuinely remorseful or if the drugs had caused his mind to cloud his judgment. In the hours that followed, investigators began to piece together the events leading up to Lauren's death. Matt's claim that he was under the influence of quercetin cough and cold medicine seemed plausible, but there were inconsistencies in his story. While the medicine could have contributed to his disorientation, it didn't fully explain the brutal reality of the crime scene. The detectives began their deep dive into the couple's history. They learned of the troubled marriage, the financial betrayals, and the intense emotional turmoil that had plagued their relationship in the months prior to the incident. Matt's erratic behavior, fueled by a combination of emotional strain, personal failure, and possibly substance abuse, had left him vulnerable to making irrational decisions. But the question remained, was this a case of a man pushed to the brink by the weight of his failures, or was there something more sinister at play? In the days following the tragedy, Lauren's family was left in utter shock. Her parents, who had feared the worst for so long, could hardly bring themselves to accept the truth of what had happened. They had always known that Matt was volatile, but never in their worst nightmares did they imagine that he would cross the line into violence. As the investigation unfolded, the police began to question the timeline Matt had provided. His claim of being disoriented after taking the medication raised suspicions. The autopsy revealed that Lauren had been stabbed multiple times, and the extent of the injuries suggested a level of rage that didn't align with Matt's depiction of his actions as the result of a bad dream. The defense team, in consultation with Matt's legal counsel, suggested that his state of mind at the time of the incident had been compromised due to the quercetin overdose. They argued that he was not fully aware of what he was doing, rendering him incapable of forming the intent to murder his wife. They painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by the pressure of his failing marriage, grappling with substance misuse, and struggling to cope with the emotional toll of his actions. However, the prosecution was determined to prove that Matt had intentionally taken steps to kill Lauren. They emphasized the methodical nature of the attack, the fact that Matt had had time to reflect on his actions before calling 911, and the absence of any clear indication that his behavior had been entirely involuntary. The trial became a media sensation, capturing the attention of the public due to the tragic nature of the crime and the complexity of Matt's defense. The courtroom was filled with tension as both sides presented their arguments. Lauren's family members spoke about their memories of her, painting a picture of a woman who had been loving, kind, and hopeful for the future, despite the tumultuous period she had endured with Matt. They described her heartbreak over his betrayals and how she had tried tirelessly to save their marriage, even as she confronted the painful reality of Matt's repeated lies. On the other side, Matt's defense team worked tirelessly to convince the jury that Matt had been a broken man, consumed by guilt and overwhelmed by the mental and emotional toll of his actions. They depicted him as a man who had reached a breaking point, one who had never intended for things to escalate to the level of violence that occurred. As the trial drew to a close, the jury deliberated for hours, carefully weighing the evidence and the arguments presented. The decision they faced was not an easy one. On one hand, Matt's actions were undeniably horrific, but on the other hand, there was a question of whether he had the mental capacity to understand the consequences of his actions at the time. Finally, the verdict was delivered. Matt Phelps was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury concluded that while his state of mind had been compromised, he had still knowingly and recklessly taken the life of his wife. The judge sentenced Matt to 25 years in prison, acknowledging the pain he had caused not only to Lauren's family but also to himself. The news sent shockwaves through the community. People were left grappling with the question of whether Matt's actions had been a tragic accident or the result of a deliberate decision. Some argued that the emotional weight of his troubled marriage, combined with the influence of the drugs, had pushed him to make a fatal choice. Others believed that Matt had crossed a line that no one should have been able to return from, no matter the circumstances. In the years that followed, Lauren's family continued to mourn her loss, but they also worked tirelessly to ensure that her memory was preserved. They established a foundation in her honor, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence, emotional abuse, and the signs of toxic relationships. They wanted others to know that while Lauren's life was tragically cut short, her story could serve as a warning to those in similar situations, urging them to seek help before it was too late. For Matt, the prison walls became a constant reminder of the life he had destroyed, his own, his family's, and the life of the woman he had once loved. The years spent behind bars were marked by reflection, remorse, and an understanding that no amount of time could ever undo the irreversible damage he had caused. But through it all, he clung to the hope that somehow, in some way, he could make amends for the mistakes that had led him down such a dark path. The brutal murder of his wife. His disoriented state, still trembling with fear, made it difficult for investigators to discern the full extent of his guilt. Matt's account of the night's events was erratic, his words jumping from one thought to another in a haze of confusion. He repeated over and over that he never meant for it to happen, that it had all been a mistake, a moment of madness brought on by the drugs he had taken. Detectives tried to focus on the details of his account, hoping to extract any meaningful information that could shed light on the tragic events. According to Matt, the night had started innocuously enough. After a heated argument with Lauren earlier in the evening, he had taken the quercetin, hoping it would calm his nerves and help him sleep. He described feeling dizzy and detached as he lay in bed, the medication clouding his thoughts. He claimed that when he woke up, he found himself in a nightmare. He saw his wife's lifeless body on the floor, blood everywhere, and could not remember what had happened. The sight of her had sent him into a panic, and in his terror, he immediately dialed 911, convinced that he had killed her. But the investigators knew that there was more to the story. The evidence at the scene painted a different picture, a picture that didn't align with Matt's version of events. The nature of Lauren's injuries suggested that the attack had not been impulsive or random, as Matt had suggested. The severity of the wounds indicated a level of rage that was hard to reconcile with the image of a man who had simply been acting out of confusion or a bad dream. The question lingered in the air, was Matt telling the truth, or was he trying to cover up a more deliberate act? As the hours passed, the pressure mounted on Matt. His answers grew more inconsistent, his demeanor increasingly agitated as the weight of his actions seemed to sink in. He struggled to reconcile the man he thought he was with the murderer he had become in the blink of an eye. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the horror he had just witnessed and his own involvement in it. Meanwhile, the police had begun to uncover a troubling history between Matt and Lauren. Investigators learned that the couple had been in a volatile, on-again off-again relationship for several years. While there had been moments of happiness and normalcy, those moments were often overshadowed by intense arguments, betrayal, and infidelity. Lauren had confided in friends and family that Matt's behavior had become increasingly erratic and unpredictable, and she had struggled to maintain a sense of peace in the marriage. Despite their issues, Lauren had tried to make it work, hoping that things would improve over time. But that hope seemed to evaporate in the months leading up to her death. Lauren had begun talking to her sister about the possibility of leaving Matt. She had mentioned that she felt unsafe and trapped in a relationship that was slowly suffocating her. The realization that Matt was not the man she had once known seemed to break her spirit. She spoke of how he had grown distant and how his promises to change had become empty words. On the night of her death, she had planned to confront him once more, to tell him that she was done with the relationship for good. But tragically, she never had the chance. Detectives also learned that Matt had been struggling with addiction. His use of quercetin, along with other substances, had become a regular part of his life. Friends and family had expressed concern over his behavior, noting that he would often go into fits of paranoia or uncontrollable rage when intoxicated. They said that while he appeared to be a loving husband at times, he was also a man who could not control his impulses when under the influence. It became clear that Matt's addiction had played a significant role in the events leading up to Lauren's death. As the investigation progressed, forensic experts worked tirelessly to uncover more details about the crime. The autopsy confirmed that Lauren had been killed by multiple stab wounds, with particular emphasis on the deep, violent cuts to her throat. The position of her body, curled up on the floor, indicated that she had been taken by surprise, possibly during a moment of vulnerability. The blood spatter analysis suggested that the attack had been quick and brutal, a stark contrast to Matt's portrayal of a confused, disoriented man waking from a bad dream. The knife, which had been found on the bed as Matt had described, was examined for fingerprints and other traces of evidence. Investigators discovered that Matt's prints were all over the weapon, suggesting that he had not just discovered it in a daze but had actively used it. There were no signs of struggle or defensive wounds on Lauren's body, leading authorities to believe that she had been attacked while unaware or unable to defend herself. In light of these findings, the evidence began to paint a much clearer picture. Matt's claim of being in a fog due to the quercetin overdose was called into question. The severity and method of the attack seemed to indicate that it had been deliberate. Whether in a moment of rage or cold calculation, the act of murder could not be dismissed as an accident. But Matt continued to insist that it had all been a mistake, a tragic consequence of his broken mind. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation into Matt Phelps took on a new level of intensity. The police scrutinized every aspect of his life, from his interactions with Lauren to his financial dealings, his history with drugs, and his personal demons. They interviewed his friends, his family, and anyone who might have insight into the mind of the man who had taken his wife's life. With each new revelation, the case grew more complex. Eventually, the police learned that Matt had been facing mounting pressure in his life. Financial problems, the unraveling of his marriage, and the isolation that came with his addiction had created a toxic cocktail of emotions. In many ways, Matt had become a man out of control, a man who had pushed himself to the edge and found that the fall was both inevitable and irreversible. The trial of Matt Phelps became a media frenzy, with news outlets following every development and the public eagerly awaiting the outcome. Matt's defense team argued that he had been suffering from a severe mental breakdown brought on by his addiction and the emotional turmoil he had been enduring. They claimed that he had not intended to kill Lauren but had acted impulsively in a state of confusion. His attorneys painted a picture of a man who had lost everything, his wife, his stability, and his sense of self, and was consumed by the overwhelming guilt of his actions. On the other hand, the prosecution insisted that Matt had murdered Lauren in cold blood, pointing to the brutal nature of the crime and the evidence that suggested he had deliberately attacked her. They argued that the quercetin had not clouded his judgment to the extent that he was unaware of what he was doing, and they painted a picture of a man who had been driven by anger and resentment toward his wife. The trial was long and grueling, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. The defense focused on Matt's mental state, while the prosecution pushed for justice for Lauren, emphasizing the pain and suffering her family had endured. In the end, the jury found Matt guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging that while he may have been struggling with addiction and emotional turmoil, he had still made a conscious decision to end Lauren's life. The verdict brought a sense of closure to Lauren's family, though it did little to ease the pain of their loss. They had lost a beloved daughter, sister, and friend to a senseless act of violence. While Matt would now face the consequences of his actions, the scars of the tragedy would linger for years to come. The case of Matt Phelps and Lauren's murder would forever serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of addiction, emotional instability, and the fragile nature of the human mind. And my family. No words can fully capture the devastation we feel. Our beloved Lauren is gone, and nothing will ever bring her back. Lauren's family sat quietly in the courtroom, each person grappling with their grief in their own way. They had lost a daughter, a sister, a friend, a vibrant soul who had her whole life ahead of her, a life tragically cut short by someone she loved and trusted. As Matt's words echoed through the courtroom, his expressions of remorse seemed hollow to those who had lost everything. What could have driven him to such an extreme, they wondered. There was no easy answer. For Matt, it was a complex mix of mental health struggles, substance use, and possibly something far darker lurking beneath the surface. But for Lauren's family, the question wasn't about why it happened, it was about the unbearable reality of living without her. The case had captivated the local community, and many found it hard to reconcile the image of the soft-spoken, seemingly devout young man with the monster he had become that night. How had someone who appeared so normal, so unassuming, turned into a killer? Was it a slow descent into madness? Or was it always there, hidden beneath a mask of civility? As the days turned into weeks, the investigation into Matt's past began to reveal even more unsettling details. Beyond the disturbing posts on his secret Instagram account, which seemed to suggest a fascination with death and violence, there were also signs that he had been struggling with his mental health for years. Reports surfaced that Matt had been seeking help for depression and anxiety prior to the murder, though he had never mentioned anything about his growing obsession with violence or death. Friends and family described him as introverted and withdrawn, someone who kept to himself more than anyone realized. It soon became clear that there were multiple warning signs that were overlooked, red flags that, in hindsight, could have pointed to the possibility of danger. A childhood marked by instability, with both parents divorced and Matt bouncing between homes, had left deep, emotional scars. His upbringing had not been one of comfort and stability, and though he found solace in religion and his faith, it was evident that his struggles had never truly been addressed. The police now began to question if there were more victims of Matt's violent tendencies than just Lauren. They examined his relationships, his interactions with friends, and the strange patterns in his behavior leading up to the crime. One particular detail stood out: Matt's obsession with the concept of purity, his insistence on keeping his marriage perfect, and his increasing paranoia about Lauren's possible infidelities. Was it possible that these irrational fears, fueled by his mental state, had pushed him over the edge? Could his perception of reality have become so distorted that, in his mind, killing Lauren was the only way to maintain control over their seemingly perfect life? For Lauren's family, the trial and subsequent sentencing were not just about seeking justice, it was about coming to terms with the profound loss of their loved one. During the trial, Lauren's mother, in an emotional statement, asked the court, "Why her? Why did he take her away from us?" She spoke of the future Lauren would never have, the grandchildren she would never see, and the lives she would never touch. Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room, as they served as a painful reminder of what had been taken away. As the years passed, the details of the crime became a dark chapter in the community's history, a chapter filled with unanswered questions and lingering doubts. Could Matt have been stopped? Was there anything that could have been done to prevent this tragedy? In the absence of clear answers, people continued to speculate and search for explanations, but in the end, there would always be one undeniable truth: Lauren was gone, and nothing could bring her back. The story of Matt Phelps and the murder of his wife, Lauren, serves as a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Behind the smiles and the seemingly normal life, there can lie unimaginable darkness. For those who knew Lauren, and for the community that had witnessed the tragedy unfold, the scars of that night would never fully fade. If you found this story gripping and unsettling, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Stay tuned for more true crime stories that delve deep into the darkest corners of the human mind. Your support helps us bring more of these thought-provoking stories to life.